Are we live again? And we're back! Those of you who are old school SNL fans will get that reference. The rest of you might think that I just had a mild seizure. Anyways, today's math lesson is right here. I wore this shirt actually to a Home Depot the other day, and there's this guy who saw the shirt and he just got like genuinely angry with me, and he was like, "That must be that new math." And I was like, "Listen, old timer, they were teaching this math when you and I were in school." The reason I'm wearing it is because to solve this very simple equation and wind up with 3, which is the correct answer, you have to understand the correct order of operations. That's something that I'm going to be talking a lot more about in the future videos. By the way, I just wanted to say a really quick, I'm sorry for the delays that have plagued getting these videos put up. Not all of you know that we do have companies overseas as well, and the virus has had a tremendously negative effect on them. Thankfully, we've been able to keep all of our people employed and nobody's lost their job. Everybody's still getting paid. We're very proud of that. But some of our companies haven't made $0 in 5 months, so it's used up a lot of our cash reserves, and it's just led to a lot of sleepless nights. You combine that with, the work that's being done here as well, and well, it's just some technical issues with the gear, and next thing you know, it's 2 weeks to put up another 8-minute video. So we're going to try and do better. Let's run through this really quickly. Today, we're going to talk about some ideas that I have with regards to property valuations and taxes. The video that I just put up a few minutes ago was about an experience that I had in Central America when I watched firsthand when gentrification came to this community that I was living in on the edge of the rainforest in Costa Rica, up in the mountains. And I'm not going to repeat that entire video here. You guys can just go and take a look at that and watch that one. And it talks about why, depending on your neighbors, not to sell is not a viable strategy in terms of protecting your own property values. But that issue, that concern about grandma getting kicked out of her home because she's on a fixed income and she can't afford an increase in taxes that results from the gentrification of her neighborhood, that's a very real issue. So anyways, I've got a couple of good, positive solutions that we're going to let grandma stay in her house and also still facilitate development without having a detrimental impact on the city's finances. One of them is that we need to let people request and receive a freeze on their property valuations. So let's stay with grandma. She's living in her place, she's been there for 40 years, she's on a fixed income, suddenly somebody buys the place next door, demolishes it, builds a McMansion, and as a result of the McMansion, property values go up all around. Well, that's not fair to grandma. Grandma didn't build a McMansion, she didn't create the increase in property taxes, and she shouldn't be obligated to pay for it. Now, we know that there's no legislation out there. It'd be hard to even do the math, speaking of math, to have Mr. McMansion actually foot the increased tax bill that his project created. But it's also not fair that just because he built this house that now everybody around there suddenly has to pay more in taxes. The person who benefited from the construction or the person who created the problem should pay for it. And that's common sense, although it's evidently not common sense at all because we just don't see that in city planning. And this is one of the main reasons why people who had property literally in their families lose it, even though they own it outright. Don't get me started. Anyways, so we need to be able to say, hey, grandma, if you apply for a freeze in your property valuation, then you should get it. Not a 100% freeze. It needs to be tied to inflation as well. Now, some of the people in City Hall are going to say that's ridiculous. When property values go up, we need that money for investments in infrastructure and so on. You can't just go around freezing people's property taxes. That's irresponsible. To a point, I agree with them. The city does need to have those funds, but getting grandma kicked out of her house is what's irresponsible. That's poor stewardship. That's bad city management. So what we need to do is have the problem. This is this old saying that it's part of my personal philosophy, and it's worked very well for me in business as well, and that is that every problem that comes to you carries its own solution in its mouth. So in this case, we say, well, we don't want grandma's taxes to go up. Great, so we just don't let them go up. Well, then we don't have enough money. We need to get the money. Where do we get it? We get it from the people who have it. the guy who's building the McMansion. Now, that doesn't mean that if Grandma then turns around, once there's a McMansion here and another one on the other side and one across the street, that she turns around and says, hey, screw this, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm selling, I'm going to let somebody build a McMansion here too. The second that Grandma decides that she's going to redevelop her property, that valuation freeze obviously is off, and she's in the same boat as everybody else. It's not my suggestion that we create a measure that can be exploited for personal gain or by unscrupulous people. It should be a protection for people who are who deserve the right to live in dignity on their own property. So now, what does this mean? Well, we need to get some anti-speculation measures in place. Actually, that's the wrong term. We need to get some measures in place that are funded by speculation. So a million years ago, when I was a combat martial arts instructor, we had this concept of jutsu, which means that when an attack comes at you, you can't just absorb every attack. You need to turn it to your advantage. There's a lot of energy in the attack. There's direction and power and focus. So what you do is you make that work for you. So sticking with Mr. McMansion here, when that guy comes in to build that house, if he doesn't live in Manor, then he should pay 3 times as much for his permits. Freeze the permits for people whose primary residences are in Manor at the same prices that they're at now. And you have to provide proof of residence. If your primary residence isn't in Manor, if you haven't lived here for a year and you go to City Hall, it could be for a permit for anything, for a fence, for a pool, for a new house, whatever, that price of those permits should go up. They should literally be 3 times what they are for Manorites. And why? It's because the people who are bringing the money in, they're the ones who are elevating the property values and the taxes and creating the problems, which are going to end up with Manorites being in the same position as families in Austin that were forced out of their homes and are living in tents under overpasses. And we don't need that here. So that's a couple of things here. Let me just check my notes real quickly. Another thing that we need to think about is, again, not an anti-speculation measure, but a measure that says, look, if you're going to speculate and make a bunch of money off of property in Manor, then that wealth's got to be shared. And listen, I'm a guy who built his companies from scratch. I grew up poor. Like some of you maybe haven't seen my video, a little bit, my About Me video. There were times when if I wanted to eat, I needed to go fishing, like that kind of poor. So I'm a 100% capitalist. I'm an entrepreneur through and through. But I got to tell you, this just makes sense. If you've got somebody who doesn't live in Manor, or even if somebody who does, and they buy a property and they resell it in less than 2 years at a profit of more than 20% of the price that they bought it for, that's flipping. And we all know what flipping is. We've all seen this. There's a million shows on TV about flippers. And what I propose is that if they sell it in less than 2 years for a profit of more than 20%, then 10% of that profit needs to get paid to the city as a tax, as a flipping tax, as a speculation tax. In terms of overall impact, if you do the math, it's only 2% of the sale price in the example that I used. Nobody's going to go broke and die from that. But it's a substantial and meaningful contribution to the city that allows the city to be a beneficiary instead of the city just being like a host animal that's got ticks on it and gorging themselves, and the city gets no benefit. It's ridiculous. It's been going on for a long time. I can understand why people just go along with it because that's the way it's always been, but I'm telling you, it's nuts and it should stop. There's no reason to prevent people from improving properties, buying them, fixing them up and selling them. That's entrepreneurship. I'm 100% behind. I've done that right here at this fourplex. But I'm telling you, it's maybe something that we need to think about. Again, so that the people across the road aren't forced to pay an increase in tax price that they didn't create. And then finally, we're going to talk about abandoned properties here. I understand that there are a number of abandoned properties within the city limits of Manor. I don't know this for sure. And again, I haven't gotten straight answers from City Hall. I've asked about how are these abandoned properties dealt with. Do they go to auction? Usually, in every other city that I've lived in, abandoned properties are absorbed by the city, and then they're usually auctioned off. Those auctions are not, in theory, they're open to the general public, but they usually are comprised of political insiders or people who are friends of people who are well placed in the city. And then but they're not widely advertised because you don't want a lot of people there to drive the prices up. The idea is to try and acquire those properties at very low prices and then benefit from fixing them up and selling them. And again, I think that's wrong. Those properties, if they're absorbed by the city, then that means that the city owns them, and we're the city, right? So what should happen is that those properties should be developed, sure, or they should be sold, sure, but with a catch, okay? With a caveat, with an addendum, right? It's almost like a lien on it. Yeah, you can buy this abandoned piece of property in this corner of this intersection, but if you turn it into a gas station and ends up making $1 million a year, then guess what? The city's your partner, and the city gets 20% of those profits. And if you don't like it, then don't buy the property. Or if instead of selling the property, the city should lease them. There's just tons of precedent for that. The entire island of Hong Kong is a precedent for that 99-year lease idea. It doesn't prevent anybody from making money or doing really well, but at the same time, it does mean that the city can continue to get value from an extremely valuable asset, which is property within the city limits. And they're not making any more new property within the city limits. So instead of selling that at some bargain basement price and it's gone, and all the value and all the profit that comes from that goes into private pockets, if the city owns it, then the city should manage it and run it, or use one of these ideas that I'm putting forward here to continue to get value from it as good stewards of us, the people of Manor. That's our property. It shouldn't be sold off at a discount price. It should be rented out, and then that rental income should be directed towards the schools or towards the parks or towards fixing the broken sidewalks on Lexington Street. Getting all head up. Listen, I'm going to be back here with some more concrete suggestions about what we can do to make some real improvements in terms of getting things done effectively here in the city. There are ways for the city to move forward to accommodate the flood of development that's coming, but not to be drowned by it. I'm happy to share my ideas. Whether or not I end up getting elected to the city council is not really my concern. I'm here because I know that there are better ways of doing things, and I want to make sure that I do what I can to help out my new home. All right, so that's it for today. I'm going to hopefully be back sooner than in 2 weeks, and we'll have some more ideas for you guys to think about before the election. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.